Give a little more light. All three dimmers, just a little bit more. All right. So I didn't have my notebook today, so now I have this finger-sized notebook. Okay, so as you guys can kind of notice. Oh, by the way, what time do I have till? 9:30? 9:25? So like 8:10 or 9:10 would be 45 minutes? Okay. Okay, so I think I've been thinking about a lot lately, and as everybody can tell, it's getting a little bit more serious up in here, right? People are leaving, sad, but I think there's a reason for that. I keep thinking about when I was at Zoom, and there was a time where when we were a privately held company. So those who don't know, between a publicly held and privately held company, a privately held company is not traded on the stock market. So they're kind of under the radar in a sense. They're not in public news. Nobody cares about how much money they make. But when you're a publicly traded company, you're now in the public. You are traded on the stock market, and others can invest in stocks, right? Like me, I was in a sense an investor in Zoom because I held some stock of Zoom, and you can only do that if you're a publicly traded company. And what happens is you have people out there that are investing millions of dollars into a company. They care how that company is doing. They keep a close watch on everything the company does. They look at all their financials because they want to make sure that their investment is protected and that the money they put in increases, right? So they have a microscope on these publicly held companies. But if you're a privately held company, nobody cares because there's no investments in you. Just keep it simple. There's no investments, right? So you're just a company just trying to make it, right? There's no public spotlight on you. No, there's no, Wall Street financial looking at you, right? So at Zoom, when I was there about 4.5 years, before they announced that we're going to go public, that was about, let's say, I was at Zoom for about 3.5 years before they announced that we're going to go public. So I was basically at Zoom for a year while they were a public company. But before that, it was just it's very unorganized. It was just kind of like, oh, get this done. Everything was just kind of like, off the hip. Like, oh, we need to do this. Or I know I have to do this process, but can we just do it this way? And, the finance department would be like, oh, that's fine. We'll let it fly. Or can you send this, even though we need this signed document, we really don't need it. So, they just kind of used up all the loopholes. But as time started getting right, even things about let's say someone had an outburst of anger at work. Before, they would just kind of pull people into the office and be like, hey, what are you doing? Don't do that, But as time started getting closer to being public, and then they made that announcement, hey, we're going to go public in, a couple months. Then all of a sudden, everything started changing. It wasn't the same company anymore. It wasn't the happy Zoom where, everybody's all cool and the ropes got nice and tight, and all the processes that they were doing before, it didn't fly anymore. right? Even if you were cool with somebody, you couldn't just slide it under the rug. It was like, nope, you have to go through this avenue, and if you don't do it, I'm not approving it. And people, there was like original people that had been there since the beginning, like 7 years, since day one, and they were doing stupid stuff that, before they would just get a slap on the wrist for, but they did that same thing when we were before we went public, like right before, and especially after we went public. Those people were getting fired. There was a number one sales guy in the company. He got fired. There's executives got fired. There was like, got a little serious, and people were like, "Oh my gosh, am I working at the same company anymore? Like I'm not really happy. Like this is a little serious now." And of course, I had the same thoughts. Like, man, it's not the same anymore. It's way too serious. But I think that's the life of a company, and especially after we went public, and now we're for sure in the spotlight. Because before it was like, okay, we got to prep because we're about to be in the spotlight. But once we actually were on the spotlight and we were a publicly traded company, they brought in this new sales leader and executive, and this guy was no nonsense, zero. He did not care who had been there for a month or 7 years. He treated them exactly the same. And the restrictions were so much tighter. People were getting fired. Like people were getting put on, so if you don't hit your number, right, they call it a quota. If you don't hit your number, they put you on a plan. So that plan is like, it's kind of like when you get a job and you have a probation period, right? You have to prove that you're good for 3 to 6 months, and then from there you can keep it, right? Well, sales can work the same way. You can have a quota, and if you don't hit your quota, they're like, all right, you haven't hit your quota for the past 3 months, so we're going to put you on a plan. And this plan is a contract that says if you don't hit your number in 3 months, again, you're going to be fired. That's what happened to me. But before the CEO, his motto was, no, we're always giving everybody a chance. He would say it constantly. Managers would be furious, and they would go bring these questions to him in an all-hands meeting. So an all-hands meeting is like, imagine I'm CEO and you guys are all the employees. They ask questions out loud, so all the employees can hear the questions, and they want it to be open, right? Open between leadership and employees. And the CEO would always say, or the managers would come and say, this employee hasn't hit their quota for this and this months, and they're not motivated, and I don't know what I can do. And the CEO's like, I don't care. You do everything you can to keep them, and you do everything you can to make sure that, it's your job to build that person up, right? And make them the best that they can be. And they're like, I don't care if you have to switch them to a different department. They're not leaving this company, right? You're going to figure out a way. And the managers did not like that answer. But as soon as we became a public company, that whole rhetoric, it just completely changed. Then he was like, if you're not working up to par and you're not hitting your number, you're going to be put on a plan. Complete 180 in how things were handled at Zoom. And like I said, people were getting fired. Longtime members, they were just treated like they were just another person. They didn't have any clout or respect. Oh, you've been here 7 years. You're an OG. You're a legend. Nope, didn't matter at that point. And there was this documentary I watched about this clothing brand. It's called The Hundreds. It's like a hip hop brand, skater brand. And they're not too big now, but they were maybe 5-10 years back. They were huge. And the guy was saying that when they started out, it was just like him and like 3 or 4 of his friends, right? And they're like, hey, it'd be really, how you friends talk when you're young, it'd be so cool if we were like, we made a clothing brand, and we could just, nobody has a brand like ours, and everybody is really ambitious, right? Well, these guys had the same thoughts, and they started just selling T-shirts, and they just started exploding. Like people were buying their stuff. Like there was a magazine that came out and Jay-Z was wearing their clothing and like they was just flying off the shelf. And they're like, oh my gosh, like we can't just be a gun off the hip kind of company anymore. We can't just, that package is over there and that package is over there and that package is at my friend's house and we got to ship them out and, do you have $5? And, it was just super messy. And they're like, no, we have to get it together. And so they started becoming an actual company. It wasn't just like a bunch of friends hanging out together selling shirts and they're making money. And like now they were becoming like a legit company that is nationwide known. And the owner, he's talking about, when he's doing the documentary, he's like in his 40s, right? Because he's been doing it for a while. But they started when they're in their 20s, and he was like, yeah, I mean, it didn't click with them. And they did not like that it wasn't like how it was before, right? They miss going to, the parties and handing out the shirts and the festivals and having a booth and selling shirts, and having that kind of fun, right? But when it became serious and they started to become an actual company with a building and employees come in and there's paychecks and you have payroll and you got benefits and all this, stuff, it got a little serious. And the guys were still had that mentality of kind of messing around. And he had to fire some of his best friends because they didn't get it. They didn't get that it's not always going to be like that. They can have fun, but it's not always fun and games. At some point, there has to be that serious hat that's put on, and you have to think, all right, I get that we, like this clothing brand, but now we're a business and we have to make money. So a lot of this playing around and making the company look bad, like that's not going to fly anymore. So he had to fire a lot of his guys. It got me thinking and about how stuff's playing out at the church, and I'm like, man, and Pastor was saying that he thinks that in 2021 that God might put us on the map, right? So a lot of these thoughts are coming to my mind, like, this is very interesting, it's like a company, we start out like a working out of the garage in a sense, right? We got a handful of people. We got Elder Sarah and Pastor Steve and a couple children, right? But then, and we always have fun, right? But as things go higher, it just starts getting a little more serious. You could feel it. And I think that God allows. I was talking with about this to somebody, but it's like, think about an NFL or an NBA team, right? Let's say basketball. You have 5 players on the court that start the game. So if you're one of those 5 players, you're the trusted player, right? And then there's a bunch of bench players. And if God says that we're the leadership in this church, right? If all of us are supposed to be leaders, you think in the NBA Finals or the Super Bowl or something like that, right? Like NBA Finals is a championship game for basketball. You think that the Lakers are going to go send all their bench players to go play against the other team? No. They're going to make sure that the people that are on that court playing in the championship game, players 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, they are all A-plus players, and that they all know how to take care of business. They're all committed. They're all dedicated. He's not going to send a third-string point guard to start in the game. It's just not going to work like that because they're not up to par. And I believe it works the same thing in the church, and I think that's why it's getting a little serious now because, in a sense, right, if we're following what Pastor says and he says, let's say, oh, God might put us on the map, right? Well, if that's the case, then we have to be more serious, right? And I think of it like Zoom, and they were saying that, or I think pastor said on one of the preaching like a couple weeks ago, he said, God said he's going to send more people, right? And if that is soon, then we have to be on our game, right? We have to be on our A game, because we can't be put on the map in a sense, and people start coming here to receive love and try to look for a purpose in life, and we're all messed up. Because one, that's going to make God look bad, and two, we're going to mess up other people's lives. And who do you think's held accountable? The leadership, right? So I think it's getting really serious, because it's like you can almost look at the people sitting in this chair as like a starting five, right? Like, and God's like shaking that tree, and he's like, are you committed? Are you my A-plus player? Because if you're not, then you're going to have to go sit on the bench. And if you're lukewarm, then I don't know if you can handle this ministry. Straight up, right? Like, people, it's sad when people leave, it's really sad. But at the same time, God can't have a leader that's shaky. That's just reality. You're not going to put somebody on third string on a point guard or third string player to start in a championship game, right? God, I think, is like, I want the leaders in this church that are firm, planted, dedicated, no nonsense. And above all, that represent him the most, right? And I'm going to get into a couple stories where people had that old mentality. They kind of thought, what's the big deal? I did it before. Why can't I do it again? Well, you can keep thinking that, but as you can see now, God is tightening that rope real tight, because he's not going to have shaky leadership, right? He wants his leadership firmly planted, because if people come to this church and we have shaky leadership, like I just said, and you put that shakiness onto a new baby Christian that comes in, and you stumble them and they leave, that's bad. That's bad, right? And I mean, what if God sends like 50 people and we lose 40 of them because we're not ready, in a sense? That's not going to be good for whoever stumbles those people, So let's go into some of these verses here. Let's start off with 2 Samuel 6. Okay. So they make David king, right? They want to make him king, and so they're going to bring him back. They're going to bring him back to the home city, and they're doing that. They're representing that by bringing the ark back to the city, and they're going to celebrate David's king, right? They're bringing the ark because that's like God's presence is now entering the city, right? So we all know about the story about Uzzah, right? So let me read. This is 2 Samuel 6, verse 1. I'm just going to go through. David again gathered all the best soldiers in Israel. The best soldiers, not the shakiest and the non-dedicated and people that don't care or don't take care of business. He's talking about the best soldiers in Israel. So keep in mind, these are the best of the best soldiers, but yet they're still making a mistake. So it doesn't matter if you've been here a long time, right? It doesn't matter how high position you are, right? Like, I'm still held accountable just as much as any of you guys are. If I go and do something dumb, I'm going to be held accountable. It doesn't matter who or what position you're in, right? But in a sense, all of us in here are leaders or are going to be leaders for this church, so that when people come, we can support them, right? So we could be the best soldiers in a sense. There were 30,000 men. Then David and all his men went to Bela in Judah to take God's holy box there, right? Ark. The holy box is like God's throne. So imagine if it was possible. Imagine if you were moving God's throne. How careful would you be with that? Right? You got to think about that. People go there to call on the name of the Lord All-Powerful, who sits as king above the cherub angels that are on the box. David's men brought the holy box out of Abinadab's house on the hill. Then they put God's holy box on a new wagon. Uzzah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, were driving the new wagon. So they carried the holy box out of Abinadab's house on the hill. The sons of Abinadab, Uzzah, and Ahio drove the new wagon. Ahio was walking in front of the holy box, right? So they're celebrating, but the context and the written word of God says, right, for their tradition was if you're going to be moving the ark, you have to do a certain amount. Pastors preach on this before, but you have to take a certain amount of steps, and you have to sacrifice a bull or some kind of animal, right? But I think they got a little comfortable, and they didn't, they thought, well, we've been doing it this way for a while, right? But what they didn't realize is that, right, you could look at like David is king now. That's like, right, you have the difference between Saul and David, right? So there's Saul who got, pushed out, but then you have David who represents God, right? He's one of the telltale signs of the presence of God in the Bible. So David, in a sense, is going to the city to become king. So you could look at that as God is now, in a sense, revealing his presence more, right? Like he's now coming for his people, being represented as David, right? So it's like before God was kind of watching, but now God's coming. He's coming now, right? And it's like, are we ready, right? And they got a little comfortable, and they weren't paying attention to protocol that they should have always been following. And they thought, oh, we've always done this way for 5 years or something, right? And nothing ever happened. But it was just a bad timing because they're thinking, and they didn't change that protocol, and now God's showing up, in a sense, because David is now coming, representing God. And so David and all the Israelites were dancing in front of the Lord and playing all kinds of musical instruments. There were lyres, harps, drums, rattles, instruments made from cypress wood, and cymbals. When David's men came to the threshing floor of Nakon, and you don't have to go to it, but in the Chronicles version, in 1 Chronicles 13, let's just go to it. It's the next tab over. And scroll down. I'll tell you when to stop. Okay, go up a little bit. You going? Right there. Okay. Verse 9, it says, they came to Chidon's threshing floor. So let's go back to the other one. So sometimes I like to look up what these names mean. And it said Chidon, because it just says here to the threshing floor of Nakon, right? It could have different names. But in the other version, it says Chidon. So I looked up Chidon, and it says tip of the spear. So it's like, we all know the threshing floor. It's like the breaking ground, the testing ground. It's like right at the tip of your test, tip of the spear on the threshing floor. It's like right at the brink. And, right, you don't want to be right at the brink and then now God's showing up. It's like that verse that says, oh, God could come like a thief in the night. You always got to be prepared, right? So in a sense, they weren't prepared. And God's showing up right at the tip of the threshing floor, right at the edge when they should have been prepared. God's coming. The oxen stumbled. When David's men came to the threshing floor of Nakon, the oxen stumbled, and God's holy box began to fall off the wagon. Uzzah caught the holy box, right? So, if something's falling, what's your instinct, Right? You want to grab it. How much more it says that the holy box is like God's throne. What if you've seen God's throne just falling? Like, right, you're going to your instinct is going to go grab it, right? But they're not following the right protocol. They're kind of messing around, right? And they irreverently go to catch the box, but the Lord was angry with Uzzah and killed him for that mistake. Pastor said that there's another version. I don't remember, I couldn't find it, but when he preached about this a couple years ago, he said that one of the versions said that like Uzzah exploded. Like literally, like lightning or fire came down as he touched the box and just disintegrated, just right there on the spot. Uzzah showed he did not honor God when he touched the holy box, so he died there by David's holy box. David was upset because the Lord had killed Uzzah. David called that place Perez Uzzah, which is judgment of Uzzah. It is still called Perez Uzzah today. Now we're getting somewhere. Verse 9, David became afraid of the Lord that day. Oh, now we want to be afraid, right? Like, why were we not afraid the whole time, right? Like, why is it that now judgment comes to Uzzah or you or your situation? Now we want to be afraid. Like, the Bible says we should be working out our salvation with fear and trembling, not with comfortableness and laziness, right? So we got to be on top of our game, like, right? Like every day is a Super Bowl, right? Like I'm not perfect. I make mistakes too, but I got to be on my game too, like I got to be ready. So if God comes like a thief in the night, I'm prepared, right? And you shouldn't be afraid after the fact. You should always be trembling with fear and reverent towards God. But that tells you right there in verse 9 that they weren't taking care of business and they became a little too relaxed because they weren't on their toes anymore. Now that fear of the Lord comes back into David, like, oh my gosh, this guy just exploded right in front of me. Like, we better stop playing around. So David became afraid and he said, how can I bring God's holy box here now? He's like, now he's basically saying like, okay, this guy just exploded in me. Can I even touch this thing now? Like, how can we move this? So David would not move the Lord's holy box into the city of David. So he is just absolutely terrified. Okay, and then obviously, it goes to Obed-Edom, who's the guy that gets blessed, but for another day. Let's go to Numbers 20, right? So let's remember the theme here. So the theme is we have to start taking things more seriously because what you might get away with before, now that God's coming, and you're like an Uzzah who's kind of being a little too comfortable and thinks, what's the big deal? I won't get in trouble. I know it's kind of on the line. But if you do that, you better, obviously don't do that. But if for some reason you want to think that you can do that, you better hope that it's not when God showed up, because it's gonna be like an Uzzah situation, right? Your whole situation is just gonna disintegrate. So another mistake is with Moses, right? We all know this. So water from the rock. So let's scroll down a little bit, right? These guys are going in the desert, and verse 3, they quarreled with Moses and said, if only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord, right? We all know this. Why did you bring us into the wilderness? We would have been better off back in Egypt where we had, this kind of food and that kind of food. Verse 5, it has no grain or figs or grapevines. There's no water to drink. So verse 6, Moses and Aaron went from the assembly to the entrance to the tent of meeting and fell face down. Glory of the Lord appeared to them. The Lord said to Moses, take the staff and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community so they and their livestock can drink. And Pastor preached on this one too, but I want to show a theme here. It's that Moses, right? Moses has been with these guys for a while, right? He has limits, right? He's a human, but like Pastor was posted on Band the other day, like Pastor Eugene posted, God wants us to go beyond limitations, right? And I think Moses may have got upset at his people, maybe when they first exited the wilderness, or maybe the first few years. He had his episodes or moments, right? And God may have been teaching him to how to be a leader and lead all these people. But now we're deep into the wilderness, and Moses got all these people, and they're getting closer to the land, and people are starting to know who God is. And they're like, oh, this is the God that got the Israelites out of Egypt, and we heard what happened to Pharaoh and all this, right? So they're known. So now in this sense, at this stage, they're past the grace stage. They got to take care of business and they cannot have any slip-ups. And we see here that God is not playing around, because it says in verse 9, Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence just as he commanded him. Right? So God told him, speak to the rock. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, listen, you rebels, must we bring water out of this rock? Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice. So he's supposed to speak to it. He struck the rock. Water still came out, right? And Pastor was saying that God's still going to protect his reputation and do what he said, but Moses still got punished for it. 12. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust in me enough, and here's the key word, to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them. So before we go to the next story, think about what we talked about. All right, we talked about Zoom, and people got away with a lot of things. But once we became a public company, even people that had been there since day one were getting fired because they were not respecting the company's name, right? Because before, if they did something dumb, who's going to find out about it? Everyone in the company? Nobody cares, right? But now, if somebody does something dumb, everybody in the company finds out, and then the news finds out, all the investors find out, makes the CEO look bad, makes the company look bad. Now they lose millions of dollars because of one dumb mistake. Oh, one of their employees sexually harassed, right, like at Uber. Oh, one of the Uber employees sexually harassed. And now you have like millions of people that are boycotting Uber off one dumb mistake, right? So we have the Zoom example. We have the clothing brand example where the guys were, having fun, selling shirts. But then as they started becoming more serious, they started messing around still, and they didn't change their mentality to be more serious. And so the owner had to fire some of his best friends because they're making the company look bad, right? And then we go to Uzzah, where they should have been following protocol, but they got a little too comfortable. And so Uzzah was disrespectful and in this sense, and went and touched God's holy box. So he touched the ark, and God exploded him, right? And then we have Numbers, where Moses did not handle the situation correctly, right? So he knows that, right, just like Zoom has the name that they have to protect, and if anyone defiles that name, they have to get that person out of there, right? They have to fire some of the original 10 employees because they were acting dumb. And like God's going to be the same way, right? Like you can replace the name of Zoom with God. And if anybody disrespects God's name, at a certain level, God might give you grace because, right, we're privately held in a sense, right? Not a lot of people know about us, and we're still learning. But when that time comes where, like Pastor said, we might get put on the map, or like more people start coming, and you do that same action, and it makes God look bad, all those people, like it says, go up a little bit, right there. Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy, keywords, in the sight of the Israelites, you will not, he's basically saying, you're not going to the promised land. So two things. Moses did not honor him. Well, why didn't he honor him? God's saying that Moses did not honor him because he did not make him look, he made God look bad. So all these stories have to do with making the name look bad, right? So at Zoom, if I do something dumb, it makes the company look bad. They're coming after me. Even if I've been there for a long time, don't matter, right? That clothing company, one of those guys does something dumb, makes the company look bad, they have to fire the employee. Because then if they side with the employee, then they're basically saying to the customers and everybody watching, you don't mean nothing. Your opinion doesn't mean anything. And with God, how much more serious, right? right? Everything that we do is to save souls. But the way that we do that is we have to show people who God is. And if we show people that God is disrespectful and he doesn't know how to handle business, God's going to come after us. So that's why God, at a certain point, if that time is coming where we could be put on the map in a sense, God is going to tighten those ropes nice and tight, because he knows that if people come and we disrespect his name, he's going to hit us, and he's going to hit us hard, because while he does love us, it says in the Bible, I don't do this for you, I do this for my name's sake. The way that people get saved is they have to know who Jesus is, who his character is. And if they know his character as something negative, they're not going to want to know who God is, right? They want someone that's loving and caring and nurturing, right? And that's how we're supposed to portray God. But if we portray him negatively at a level where now we're in the public eye and people are watching, God's gonna strike you hard, because you're gonna make him look bad, and that could ultimately result in lost souls, which is now you have double price tag on your head. You got making God look bad, and then you also you just lost 5 souls, and now you're responsible for all 5 of them. Right? And that's why God handled Moses so seriously. He didn't make him to the promised land. This guy is one of the biggest leaders in the whole Bible. Everybody knows Moses' name. But yet he did not receive the big promise. That's scary. So it's like Moses could be like the number 2 employee at Zoom, and the CEO could be like, I don't care. You made us look bad. Goodbye. That's basically what God did to Moses. He did not care that he was a leader of millions of people. He didn't care, how well he led the people. He cared of, did you make my name look good? Because I'm trying to save all these people, because every time you die to yourself, and every time you just be the punching bag and absorb, you're showing these people that I am love, and that I absorb and I forgive. But when you fire back, now you're making me look bad. And now the difference is, now you're making me look bad in front of all these people that are trying to be saved. So God's going to come after you. And by what we can tell here, God's not just going to come after you. He's going to do something devastating to get your attention, right? In a job, you get fired. That's pretty devastating. Uzzah exploded. That sounds pretty devastating to me. Moses did not make it to the promised land, did not receive God's promise. So to me, that sounds very serious, right? Oh, and another story I just thought of right now, I don't have it up, is when I can't remember what church it was, but it was when Peter and them were in one of the churches, and the 2 people sold their land, and they came, the husband and wife, and they came and they said, we sold our land at this price, and we're going to give this amount. But they were lying, because it was actually a different price. It was actually a higher price. And they had told Peter that it was the lower price so that they would have to give less offering. When in reality, let's say the house sold for $10, right? And they gave 20%. They would have to give $2, right? But they basically said, no, the house sold for $5, and now they only have to give $1. So they were trying to trick the system. And God gave Peter that wisdom, and Peter knew that they were full of it and lying. And so the first guy came in and he said, how much you sell this land for? And he says, this and this amount. And he's like, okay, well, you're lying to the Holy Spirit now, because in the sight of all these people, right? It's not just Peter and a few of his friends. Like, now it's Peter and the entire church and all of his ministry that he's traveling to, right? So, and then God's name on top of that. So if the people knowing that these people are lying, and Peter goes, it's all good, don't worry about it. How bad is that going to make God look? now everybody's going to think that they could play the system, right? Everybody's going to think, oh, well, God doesn't handle his people, so, but it made God look real bad. So who do you think they're going to fire in a sense? They're going to fire those people that are making God look bad, those people that are lying about it. So he said, you're lying to the Holy Spirit. Died, just died right there on the spot. Just fell down and died. And the young guys came, picked him up, threw him out in the back. So it's like, hey, no worries. You've been here a long time. You want to just, do something irreverent and dumb? Well, that's okay. You making God look bad now when all these people are here now to be saved and you make God's name look bad? Okay, you're going to have to go. Young people, come and replace them. That's how I see it. And the wife came in, and I can't remember the order, if it was wife first, husband first, but the other spouse comes in, says the same thing and lies, knowing that the other guy just died. The woman didn't know that the husband just died. And so she comes in, tells a lie, dies right on the spot. Young guys come pick him up, throw him out in the back. So it's like, again, God does it twice. He has the same, sometimes, who's it, Pastor Kim or somebody was saying when God says something twice, it's like really important. Might have been like Pastor Joseph. Or remember, Pastor Steve says, if he says remember, then it's, we should probably remember. It's probably important, right? So God shows the same story 2 times. One person comes, lies, drops dead. Another person comes, lies, drops dead. I was like, hello, you better take this stuff seriously, because when you're in the side of people and you do something that you got away with before, but you should have corrected it, and now you're going to bring it to this area where God's presence is now increased and everybody's watching, you're going to get hit severely, right? You could spiritually disintegrate. You could spiritually just drop dead. You could spiritually get fired, right? I mean, all these examples are in the Bible. They're like crazy examples. Exploding, dropping dead, not receiving the promised land, even though Moses is like, one of the greatest leaders in the Bible. God's like, I don't care. You made my name look bad, and because of that, we're going to be forfeiting some souls, and you're responsible for that, and here's your price. And it's a pretty hefty price, as we can see. Let's go to Leviticus 10. God destroys Nadab and Abihu. So Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, Aaron is priest, and Nadab and Abihu are his sons. So by default, they are allowed to help in the processes of the priesthood. Now, reading this, let's just read it first. Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, made a mistake. First line. They took their incense dishes and put some fire and incense in them, but they did not use the fire that was on the altar. They took fire from some other place and brought it to the Lord. So the other version says strange fire. This is not what he had commanded. So fire came from the Lord and destroyed Nadab and Abihu, and they died there, right in the spot they were standing in front of the Lord. So if it sounds like the same wording is used here and also in the Uzzah story. So they probably just exploded and disintegrated, just like Uzzah. So again, we have another example of disrespect the Lord, make him look bad, they get severely struck bad. And I look at this and it's like, like I was preaching about a couple weeks ago, it's like you see the end result of something. Like a bad, let's say somebody in the church makes a bad mistake, and you're like, oh my gosh, how could you do that? How could you XYZ? How could you leave? How could you, do something else? But what we didn't see behind closed doors is those seeds being sown of that thing, right? That bad habit. But we see somebody get say we see somebody get a new house or something, right? And then it's like, oh my gosh, how did you get that house? Well, they didn't just wake up in the morning and get the house. Like, it took years and years and years and test and just teeth grinding, blood sweating moments of seed sowing for years to get that end result. and remember I talked about last time, the same thing can happen at the other end of it. How could somebody do such a horrible thing? But they sowed that. They sowed that for years and years, right? It's like that guy that was prophesied to, and the prophet starts crying. He's like, oh my gosh. And then the guy's like, what? And he's like, God's showing me you're going to go rip open pregnant women and babies and you're going to slaughter them and throw them in the fire and all this. And he's like, what? I would never do that. But there was probably, he might not have done that big thing right now, but he sowed up to that, right? He sowed up to that. He committed those acts. So then when that time came, it wasn't so hard for him to go slaughter the babies and throw them in the fire and all that stuff, right? There was a process. So I think that when you see stuff like this, like, how could Nadab and Abihu do something so dumb and try to go in and do what their dad does? That's only reserved for Aaron. But I think that they have been doing it. I think that they had been sowing that seed, and God's like, I'm giving you a chance right now, because when the time comes where I'm now going to hold you responsible, you better be ready. And the time came, and they were still making the dumb mistake, and so God exploded them right there on the spot. So we can't look at it like, oh my gosh, how could God do that? Well, they sowed that seed for a long time. You don't think God gave them a million chances? Of course he did. That's who God is. Right? And then my last verse is 1 Samuel. And we all know about Saul. So let's scroll down. Oh, no, actually, no. I gave you the right verse on this one. So I talked about this story before, but I wanted to bring a different angle. Saul was supposed to wait 7 days because the Philistines were attacking them, and Samuel, when he had anointed him king on the road when they was looking for the donkey, he said, I'm going to meet you at Gilgal in 7 days. Wait for me there and do not do anything. This is the command of the Lord. So Saul goes, becomes king. Philistines are coming. There is big time pressure. And the Philistines at that time, I was reading, they're like super technologically advanced. It could be like another nation that has like missiles, and we're still working off like swords, right? So they could be like super afraid and behind. They know they're going to lose. And all the people, all the army is like terrified. They're already running away. Saul's standing there. It's on the seventh day. Seventh day passes. Samuel doesn't show up. All his men are gone, Saul's men. And he's wondering, okay, I'm screwed now. And I don't know what the heck's with this guy Samuel. He never showed up. He said he was supposed to be here, right? And he doesn't have respect. And he goes and offers a sacrifice. And from the outside, it looks like, right, from the outside we could say, oh, Saul disobeyed, obviously. But the angle I want to bring on this is that not only did Saul disobey, he did what the priests are supposed to do. The priests are supposed to offer the sacrifices, right? The priesthood is the one that prepares the offering, right? People come and bring the rams and the oxen and all that, and they take it, they skin it and take the certain parts of it, and God says, put this part in the soup and whatnot, or boil this part, and then put this part on the altar, burn it up, right? The priest is the one who prepares all of that and does all that. Saul is not a priest, he's a king. Big difference. Saul has to consult with the prophets and God in order to get his decisions, right? He does not have that authority, right? He has a sense of kingly authority, but the spiritual authority is given to the prophets. And Saul thinks, well, I'm a king. Obviously, I can do whatever I want. So let me go ahead and offer sacrifices. What's the big deal? I'm a king. I'm an authority. I can do it too. So he offers the sacrifices, which obviously was disobeying. But the key point I want to bring here is that he did what he was not supposed to do. He did what the priests are supposed to do. So he's making that whole line look bad. He's making God look bad by disobeying. So again, as another point, all of these examples I'm giving, now Saul gets the hammer. And all of these examples are scary, right? exploding, dying on the spot, can't enter the promised land, also exploding for Nadab and Abihu, and then Saul gets rejected as king. That's pretty serious, right? He just lost his position, and he had a very high position. It's scary. So just because you can be in an authority position, no matter what level, or you might have authority over something, it doesn't mean you have free reign. Your reign is limited to what God limits you to. God says, I want you to do X, Y, Z. And if you're doing X, Y, A, you don't think you're going to get hit? God gave you the boundaries, and you outstep those boundaries because you think that you're able to do that thing. That's not true, though. You're able to do what God allows you to do. It doesn't matter how high up you are. You don't think Pastor Kim has limitations from God too? I bet you, God tells him the things that I want you to write 10 books. You don't see Pastor Kim being like, no. No, he's writing those books because that's what God instructed him to do. He is held accountable just like every single one of us. So don't think because you're some like authority, or even if you don't have a title, if you have authority over something, that doesn't mean you're all of a sudden free reign. You're held accountable just as everybody else, and you have to follow the commands of God and the instruction from our pastors, right? So the point in all of this, and it was the title of my sermon, but it's perfect for the end, is that God is not playing, right? As we get to a higher level, and as if our church goes on the map, in a sense, going public to the public eye, that's a scary thing, because that means the ropes are going to get tight, and God is not going to allow the things that he used to allow out of grace, because now it's going to make his name look bad. People are going to get stumbled. We're going to lose souls, and God's not going to be playing with that. And as you can see from these 8 examples I gave, every single one of those outcomes was terrifyingly bad, right? So as time passes and we move to this year 2021 and new seasons, it should never be how like David was. It should never be Uzzah gets killed and then David's afraid, like, oh my gosh, how can I even handle this God's presence now? Like, if I even touch it, I'm going to explode. Well, he should have been having that attitude the whole time. He should have been living in that fear and trembling the entire time, so that when they did move the ark, it's just the same business. We're moving it with fear and trembling. We're supposed to take this many steps and offer a sacrifice. We're supposed to follow the protocol that God gave us. We got too comfortable, and now God has to strike him severely, kill one of his guys who's leading the parade of the ark, and now David's afraid. No. We should always be in the fear and trembling mode, because we don't know when that time comes where God's like, all right, now it's real business. And if you mess up this time, you might have got away with it before, but this time you don't want to mess up, because God's given us those examples that the outcome is very ugly, right? We don't want to be in that situation. It's good to be prepared now, so that, right, when people come, it's not just about, oh, how bad our situation and, we just lost everything. And, well, it's not about that. The worst thing is that we just lost people, right? Because of our mistake, maybe God struck us severely and we lost everything. But that's nothing compared to how God sees it. God sees, you just messed up and you lost 5 of my souls. What's more important? Your things that you lost, or 5 people that now might not have the chance to go to heaven. Now they have to go to hell because we made a mistake. That's pretty sad. So in my eyes, we should probably, get on the ball so that when the time comes, we are already in fear and trembling mode. When we have to take God's presence with us, we already know to take those certain amount of steps and offer a sacrifice. We're not being too comfortable like Uzzah and David when they should have been in that fear and trembling mode from the beginning. But they learned afterwards, but better not to have to learn that and just already do what you were told a long time ago, right? So as this year is now started today, think about renewing that fear of God in you, because things can become a little mundane because God can allow you to just do the same thing, work and job and come to church. But that he does not say, oh, you can just, slack off and relax. We have to keep that same fear and trembling because there'll be a time where now it really starts to count and God's going to hold us accountable. And we don't want to, he's actually telling us now he's actually helping us to learn this now because he doesn't want to have to do something like that to us. He doesn't want that severe judgment to come. That's why it's like God is mercy, right? Like people who don't understand God's character, they're going to read this and be like, that's so messed up. How could God do that? Well, God's been giving them chances so that he does not have to do that, right? Don't go up the mountain or touch the mountain because my presence is there. You think he's saying that because he just wants to be like this all-exclusive thing? No, it's because these guys at the bottom of the mountain are not prepared. And if they go near God's presence, God has no choice but to explode on them, right? Like his presence is so strong without even trying it. People are just going to die just by walking near him, right? So it's actually mercy that God is severely handing people now because he's like, this is nothing. Wait till later when it really counts. And we got all these people coming and we're in the public eye. And you make a mistake then, it's going to be 10 times, 50 times worse. So God loves us so much that he wants us to get it right now so that we don't have to go through that severe judgment when the time comes, right? Amen. That's it.